Welcome everyone to Politically High Tech with your host Elias. Yes, for those who love newcomers, I keep bringing them. Some even come to me. I mean, I just go by what I think, who I think is great. I have to reject some of them because some of them want to promote kitty stuff. This is not a kitty kind of podcast. Nope, not for fashion design. Nope. House interior design. Nope. Even though I need that help personally, but nope, not for the audience. I'd rather share politics, tech, and development. And development in this podcast just means anything that can elevate humanity in a productive, positive way. And that obviously does include the great God. God, Jesus, and I include some of the religions from time to time. I was raised as a Christian because that's the one I am most familiar with. But we are going to mix at least two of them together, actually, possibly even three. So this could be a great mesh of three of the major topics. Definitely the geopolitics, history, all of that. And even the development. We are gonna add some God for those of you who get easily offended by God. That's a you problem. God is ready. You're not ready, okay? And we gonna mix in some tech. All I know is I'm not gonna go through my history. I kind of went through that some of the past episodes. You figure out what is what. I already just told one of the last tech episodes I was already released at. The oldest internet I know was AOL, the You Got Mail thing. Yes, I'm aging myself just a teeny bit, Oh, hurts a little bit, but enough about me. And we're not going to get into all of that as much. I might compare it, I might break that promise. I'm going to be honest. I might break it. I'm going to break, promises are meant to be broken. Yes, cynics, you might get your victory here. But I got a very, very accomplished guest. And trust me, he has his own library to his own. I'm telling you, especially when you plug in that website, start checking it out. He has a library. You want to check in God and politics, I connects the two very well. Look no further. We have Dr. Bob Thiel. And before we get started, feel free to introduce yourself and what do you want the audience, the listeners, and the viewers to know about?
Let's see. So as far as things that are relevant, I was raised in Michigan, went to the military. That's when I moved to California. I'm coming to you now from California. The reason I went to the military is I didn't want to go to college. Now I've got 12 or 14 years of college. I'm a published scientist, theologian. I've written a lot of books. As far as with the current president, I've actually written 2 books. I wrote one that came out just before he came into office the first time, and world events lined up with at least 22 things in that book that I predicted or were warned about. And then currently, a couple of days before he became president the second time, I put out this book. And one of the reasons I want to hold this up is, how can I put this? I'm not a Republican nor a Democrat, and I'm not encouraging you to vote one way or the other. I don't vote. All right. The book is called Unintended Consequences in Donald Trump's Presidency. Some of you listening probably can't stand Trump. Anything about Trump, if it's not horrible, you don't want to hear it. Others, if it's not positive toward Trump, you don't want to hear it. Okay. I'm not trying to be pro or con Donald Trump. What I do say, and that's why it's called Unintended Consequences, is that Donald Trump has done things, will do things, and that will affect the world, which people agree with that part. But there are also things that align with prophecies. And so basically, one of the things what I want the listeners to get out of this is that actually, despite nonsense you'll read at Wikipedia. And by the way, I was an editor for Wikipedia. In fact, the last time I edited was probably last year, but I was a more serious editor for Wikipedia like 30 years ago. But they'll put stuff on there. And if you do a Google search, first thing that comes up is Wikipedia almost all the time, even though it's not it, because it seems to be biased toward Wikipedia. And you go to Wikipedia and they'll discount certain things, and it's nonsense. And I don't want to spend a lot of time going through some of the specifics. But I'll just give one. I wasn't planning on talking about this, just thought of it. Like, for example, if you go to Wikipedia's article about the Exodus, all right, it says, the Exodus is the founding myth of the Israelite people because it was supposed to happen around the year 1250 BC, BCE, and there's no evidence it happened then. Therefore, this is just nonsense. They just made this stuff up. Okay, now that's what the Wikipedia article says. Now, it's got one little small part in there that says, now there's some who think it happened perhaps around 1446 BCE, but that's discounted. So that's all they say. Now, again, I wasn't here to talk about the Exodus, but it'll set the stage. Okay, well, it turns out there actually is evidence of the Exodus backing up a couple hundred years before. Okay, and they'll tell you there's no Egyptian evidence on it. That's nonsense. I don't know if any of your listeners have ever watched the Ten Commandments movie, the old one with Charlton Heston. You got the different plagues and all this kind of stuff happening, right? Because those are in the book of Exodus. Well, it turns out there's an Egyptian document called the Ipuwer Papyrus that actually talks about the same kinds of stuff that happened to the Egyptians that the Bible said. But you go to Wikipedia, it discounts it. And again, I'm not here to bash Wikipedia because it does have a lot of good stuff in it too. But what I do want people to realize is don't fall for this nonsense. Well, it's all debunked. No, it's not. There's no proof. Well, actually, there is. And it's interesting because I've seen editing biases. And when I first started to volunteer for Wikipedia, they said that you could have no point of view. It was mostly supposed to be just the facts. And I found out if I cited facts from like the second century, like 1800 years ago, pull them out. So wait a second. That was a fact. That wasn't my opinion because it didn't agree with their narrative. Well, anyway, that's a long introduction to this. But as far as Donald Trump, now some of your listeners don't agree with what I'm about to say. I think he thinks that what he's doing is best for the country. Now, yes, I think he does what he thinks is best for himself. Okay? Just to start off with that. But I don't think he thinks that things he's doing are bad for the country, or if they are, he thinks it's just a minor thing and things will get better and he thinks he's just right about everything. Of course, no human is right about everything. I hate to say this, Elias, neither me or you are actually going to be right about everything.
Oh yeah, no, I'm just gonna be clear. Feel free to even go off top with the Wikipedia because I'm sure it's gonna connect. I trust you. So don't worry about that. And this is not a pro or anti-Trump kind of podcast. I have pro-Trump and anti-Trump people on my show. So this is not a safe space for either camp.
Anyway,
I'm anti-safe space, by the way.
But see, my point, though, in writing what I've done is to show that some of the policies he proposed before he came in office, I mean, he was pretty clear about certain things he was going to do. That's why I was able to get this book out a couple days before he came into office. All right. And basically, he's doing things that are aligning with biblical prophecies, but he doesn't have a clue that that's what he's doing. For example, we'll go back to his first term in office and his current term in office. His first term in office, he goes out and says, look there's this thing called NATO. There's like 27, 20 or 30 countries in NATO now. There's more now, but whatever it is. And the United States spends more money on its military than all the other countries put together times 3. Okay? And overall, by the way, those other, back then it was 27, 28 countries, they have a bigger economy than the United States does. So he looks at this and says, this isn't fair. This isn't right. Okay. And as a tax-paying American citizen, I can understand why he would bring that up. Okay. So he gets the Europeans upset, gets them to try to spend a little bit more money on defense. That works a little bit. Then there's Russia's special military operation into Ukraine that was started just over 3 years ago. That scares the Europeans. Well, and then what scared them again was Donald Trump being reelected. Last week, there was a NATO conference. They've agreed not to the 2% that Donald Trump told them they should spend of their gross national product on the military. Well, supposedly, well, actually they did. Whether they do it or not is another matter. They've actually agreed to spend 5%, which is like 3 times as much or 4 times as much or 5 times as much as a lot of them were spending on their militaries by the year 2035, I think is what they said. Now, okay. Now, as it turns out, in Donald Trump's second term of office, instead of the United States spending 3 times as much as all of them put together, we only spend 2 times as much as all of them put together. All right. But now they're going to spend more money. Oh, do you have any children?
No.
Okay. All right. If you have kids and they live with you, they're kind of supposed to do what you want them to do, more or less. But you know what happens when they start to get money, their own money, particularly if they earn it? They seem to think they can spend it the way they want. Well, what's this got to do with Europe and Donald Trump? Well, you're telling these Europeans they got to spend more on their military. You're also telling the Europeans, by the way, that we're going to put all kinds of tariffs on you because Trump said the tariff was like the most beautiful word in English language or some nonsense like that. I don't agree tariffs are the most beautiful word, but I can see them as a negotiating tactic. Okay, that part I get. All right. So you got the Europeans, and we're telling the Europeans, by the way, we're going to charge you 25% tariffs on your cars, which are one of your biggest exports, and you need to spend 5% of your gross national product on military. So you know what the head of Volkswagen said several weeks ago, a month or two ago? He said, by the way, we made military things before World War II. Okay, we can do it again. So one of the things that the Europeans are doing is, one, they say they're going to increase military spending, but they also would like to figure out how to spend more domestically instead of buying it all from the United States. So what we're starting to do is to enable Europe to become a military power on its own. Because when they're spending their own money and they got a lot more weapons, they probably going to decide how they want to use them too. So the reason that is an unintended consequence is, again, I understand President Trump's logic for why he wants them to spend the money. I can understand the United States. We've been subsidizing Europe, if you will, for decades. As one of the reasons they've had the ability to have, generally speaking, greater social benefits than in this country. But when they do this, the Bible warns about, in the book of Revelation, talk about a prophecy. The book of Revelation talks about this beast that rises from the sea. And it says that this beast had a deadly wound. So in other words, it looks like it was eliminated. Well, if you look through the last century or so, you can see Germany rose up a couple of times, got other people involved, had a couple of world wars. They lost both of them. So it seems like Europe suffered a mortal wound, and who would pay any attention to them? But the Bible then says people are going to finally say, who is like this European beast and who can make war with him because he's become militarily successful. Now, that's a prophecy. It has not happened yet. Okay. But that's out there. Now, for your listeners who might be biblically inclined, some people will say, well, how do you know that's got to be Europe? This is something I'm sure President Trump does not know. I mean, maybe someone told him once, but I don't think he would know or understand it. Turns out in the book of Daniel, in the Old Testament, book of Revelation is the last book of the New Testament. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, Hebrew and Aramaic actually for this book. In the 7th chapter of the book of Daniel, Daniel sees a vision of this beast, and this beast rises out of the Great Sea. Now, as it turns out, other parts of the Bible tell you that the Great Sea is the sea that bordered what we would call Israel-Palestine these days, including Gaza. And that sea happens to be the Mediterranean Sea. Now, I've been to the Mediterranean Sea a bunch of times, and unfortunately, like the Pacific Ocean, it's normally cold. Okay. Unlike the East Coast where your water warms up more in the summer, ours doesn't warm up so much. But anyway, the Great Sea is the Mediterranean Sea according to the Bible. And so when we talk about the beast that rises from the sea, it's the Mediterranean Sea. If you look throughout a map right now, all the northern part of the Mediterranean Sea is controlled by European powers. You've got Israel on the side, and then you've got North Africa below it. But even North Africa was most of it was part of the old Roman Empire thousands of years ago. And this beast is supposed to rise, and one that Daniel saw. Most prophecy interpreters will say that one of those beasts was the Roman Empire. Okay, so it's not something unique for me, for your listeners. So anyway, what this has to do with all this stuff is that we are enabling the rise of a power that will one day, in my view, turn against the United States based upon some other prophecies. And this is one thing that's being enabled unknowingly. And so that's one of the things. Now, I don't know, again, how well many of your listeners know about certain prophetic things, but in the Bible, it talks about some power called Mystery Babylon the Great. End-time Babylon, daughter of Babylon, not ancient Babylon that Saddam Hussein thought he was putting back together. By the way, he did think he was putting it back together, and he actually had bricks made with his imprint in it because he thought he was going to restore Babylon. But that's not the one the Bible is talking about. Anyway, the Bible says it will become a great trading power, and it will help dominate the world in terms of trade, and the merchants of the world become wealthy by trading with this Babylon. It's mentioned chapter 17, 18 of the book of Revelation. Now, what does this have to do with Donald Trump? I mentioned tariffs. Now, turns out Donald Trump put tariffs on everybody, some more than others, but tariffs nonetheless. Well, if you're trading with the United States and I'm trading with the United States, for sake of argument, we won't be Americans. If we think our trade's going to get hurt, we might decide to talk to each other. Could be. There's an expression, the enemy of your enemy is your friend. Now, the morning after Donald Trump was reelected, I posted at the cogwriter.com website, one of the news posts I made, I posted that because of Donald Trump's reelection, that I believed the Europeans would move on what they called the Mercosur deal. Okay. Now, for your listeners, this is a deal that's been dragging on forever, and it's a deal involving the European Union and the Mercosur bloc of nations in South America. They are Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay. There may be one or two others, or getting involved with that. So it's supposed to be a massive deal, but they haven't. Europeans didn't go for it because basically the farmers in France are like, wait a second, we're going to get undercut by those South Americans. We don't want this deal. Well, a month to the day, actually, morning after Donald Trump was reelected, the Europeans approved it, even though the French are complaining now. They still got a couple more hurdles to go, but they've approved it. And one of the things that the president of the European Commission, of the European Union's top leader, as far as is called the European Commission president, her name is Ursula von der Leyen. And one of the things that she made a comment on was about these tariffs and what's going to happen because of them. Now, the European Union, by the way, has 449 plus million people that are in it. Ursula goes out and says to Trump, more or less, by the way, there's another 150 million people, at least their countries want to become part of us. So, that's like, 600 million people. It's kind of like double what you guys have. And she says, and she made a comment that sounded like Trump. Said, and my phone's been ringing off the hook like all the time. All these countries want to make a deal with us. And so one of the unintended consequences of promoting tariffs is the fact that we are seeing the Europeans getting more serious about making deals. Matter of fact, Ursula went over to India after Trump got in again to work on a deal they've been setting on with India for a zillion years. So one of the things Donald Trump is doing, he's motivating this trade combine to develop that the Bible warns is going to happen. It's not here yet, okay? To quote Jesus, Matthew 24:6, the end is not yet, okay? So I'm not telling everybody, okay, it's all over to tomorrow, okay? Nothing like that, all right? But I am saying that we're starting to see things aligned with that. And so that's one of the many unintended consequences of Donald Trump's trade policies. Now, I understand, by the way, why the United States would use tariffs and some other things. We do get taken advantage of by other countries. For example, we're supposed to have we had NAFTA, and we're also supposed to have something else that Donald Trump redid between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. I'm only going to talk about Canada for a moment. Now, with Canada, turns out I'm very familiar with nutritional supplements. I run a nutritional supplement company. We sell to healthcare professionals. Turns out Canadians can sell all their stuff in the United States, but we can't sell our stuff over there. We can, but we've got to jump through lots of hoops. And when we tried some years ago, Canadian government never even responded, so we gave up. And it's amazing. So I understand why, even though this is not something that Donald Trump is going to try to actually work on, I don't think. But there are non-tariff trade barriers that shouldn't be there. And I understand his desire to fix that. And again, that motivation makes sense, a certain amount of sense. I mentioned I grew up in Michigan. No industries would like, they like more autos made in the United States. I can understand Donald Trump's motivations. But the end result is that you're talking about people who are getting upset and trying to make other deals with others. So the Europeans and the Canadians, by the way, met to try to come up with some other way that they can trade better, just to use that as another example. And so if you get enough countries going in that direction, it will affect the United States. And again, I think it's biblically prophesied. So those are just a couple of things that were in the book. The easiest one, here's an easy one. I wrote, gold will hit, I'm going to read it verbatim. Gold will set records in U.S. dollar terms. Gold will set further records in U.S. dollar terms in the relatively near future, is what I wrote. And that was published January 16th. You can check it at Amazon, okay? And that was in that book. And whether your listeners have paid any attention to the price of gold, I don't remember how much it's up now, but it's up a lot, okay? 20, 30%, more than 10% anyway, from when he came in office. Now, why did I make that prediction? Because I'm a gold bug or whatever? No. Does the Bible say anything about gold? Actually, yes. There's prophecies in the book of Daniel that says that this European leader is going to rise up, is going to have a lot of gold, he's going to accumulate gold. So that tells me it's going to have value. I mentioned before about the book of Revelation. It talks about the merchants of the world who got rich through trading with this Babylon, and one of the things they mentioned was gold. Now, what that tells me is that gold is going to have some value for some period of time. Now, I don't know. I'm not saying it's always going to go up. It could go down. It might be going down right now as we talk. I don't know, although I think the markets are closed. At least the U.S. markets are closed. Okay, maybe somewhere in Asia they're open. That was a prediction based upon the Bible. and I felt that certain policies from Donald Trump would lead to that. Give another example. I told you I wrote this other book about Donald Trump before back. It came out in January 2017, and I was a guest on a radio program, and it might have been out of Louisiana. It was one of the southern states, the host, and we were going through because at that time I think Trump had been in office for I don't know 100 days plus or minus, and I said like some things that are in my book are already happening and others are going to happen. And the host agreed with me on all of them except for one. I said the United States was going to increase its debt, its official debt under Donald Trump. And he's like, oh no, he's going to solve that problem. Well, turns out you can blame it on COVID. You can blame it on Donald Trump. You can blame it on the U.S. political system. Whatever you want to blame it on, the debt went up. And Biden-Harris administration, the debt went up. Now, of course, it had gone up in the Obama-Biden administration, and it started to accelerate in the last Bush administration. As it turns out, Donald Trump is proposing something called he calls it the Big Beautiful Bill. Passed the Senate. The House still have to figure out how they're going to reconcile this. But whether it goes through or not, it has the debt going up about $3 trillion more than it would have done so otherwise. Now, to defend the president for a moment, I believe that there are more positive effects of some of the things that he's proposed than the mainstream tells you. That being said, I still think the debt will go up. Now, as far as the mainstream, though, if you don't mind, I was watching CNN last night, and there was a guy who I guess, and I don't remember his name. He was, let's call him pro-Trump, and he was picking on a CNN panelist because the last time Trump had a tax bill that went through, she and some others made various comments that were not right. Okay. For example, they said it was a tax break on the rich and the rich were going to pay less taxes. This was going to be bad on everybody. So this guy says, well, no, the amount of taxes for the rich went up. And so he tried to bring all this stuff up. And instead of acknowledging her error, instead she said, well, but that one's different than this one because this one's going to hurt poor people or regular people or whatever term. And it's like, I don't like it. It's terrible. And all of your listeners, any of you watch cable news, and I don't care if it's on the left or on the right. I actually watch both, and the amount of bias on both sides is insane.
Let me interject just a second. This is why I push ground news, all sides, because we want more fair. I mean, I lean into the center personally, and I watch even both medias just to see what the bias is. What's the left wing's bias, the right wing's bias, and sometimes the center got its bias to the center. The main source I always cite is like News Nation, because that's like the most center it's going to be. And of course, the left, CNN, and the right is Fox News. There's many other examples, but I always push those, even the new paper, because you want more unbiased, or at least get an aggregate source or a collection of it. Because 17% of the left is reporting this, only 40% of the center, and then another 40-some% on the right. That's definitely not 100%. I'm bad at math. I major in history, not in math, so deal with it. Use the comment section just to express how much better you are than me on math. I'll be perfectly fine. You're not going to affect me emotionally. I'm just give you a thumbs up to just say good for you. But all seriousness, this is why this is why I do what I do. Because look, my logo is purple for a reason. Left, right, even green, rainbow, whatever heck your color is, you're welcome to join this podcast. I'm trying to expose my audience to different points of view, different religions, different all. This is not, I hate safe space. We need to get rid of that. To me, I think it's anti-American. I know that's used for the left. The right got their own version of safe space as well. No. So that's all I'm going to say. I think it was a perfect time. It was already a little silent there. Normally I don't promote that right in the middle of the episode, but this is why I promote the stuff that I do, because the bias, just like you said, it's ridiculous on both sides of the aisle. I perfectly agree. You're not going to get an argument out of me on that one. But anyway, I'm just getting like thumbs up. For those of you who are listening to the audio, I'm giving 2 thumbs up to our guest here. This is why I make sure to accept good guests like this one here. It's not butt kissing. I just know. My gut even told me, even before I did the research and all of that. I say, oh yeah, I'll just do the research just to confirm. But all right. All right. And yeah, this is why you need to look into more sources. You think CNN is going to help you or Fox News? Even sometimes, I mean, News Nation kind of does, but News Nation even got his blind spot because sometimes they focus on celebrity garbage, and that doesn't necessarily help you either. And it's been, and it's sad to say, there's studies now confirming that if you pay attention to celebrity news, your IQ goes down. I didn't need a study to confirm that. I just talk to people every day. The ones who are obsessed with celebrities, they're not the brightest people. And I'm trying to be nice here, but I'm trying to, okay, let me calm down my new aggression. They're not the brightest people. They're not. But anyways, before I go on this long tangent, I want to derail this. So far, Dr. Bob Thiel's been on an amazing track. I don't want to derail that. I just almost did. Um, Feel free to express that if it's a good thing or a bad thing. That's what the comment section is there for. I welcome your opinion, whether you like me or not. So that's all I'm gonna say about that. But you said a lot of valuable stuff. So it's so hard to question. You see, I do understand some of the Trump thing. I do agree that the trade practices have been unfair. Especially for the United States. We've always been overly generous, overly naive, or just passive and weak on the trade deal. That's why I understand some of the NATO stuff. I don't agree with dismantling NATO, but I do get where he's coming from there. That's why I've always been pretty supportive of Trump. But the tariff thing, I'm just personally, I have not been a fan of it because I just think it was too aggressive, too overboard, too simplified. I know he had different percentages for different countries and different goods. I'm not going to get into that. I'll just find a massive link one day. You just want to read through those details. I don't know. Canadian steel. I'm just going to make up a bad example. 15%. I don't know. Japanese food. 30%. It's just made up, okay? And I'm not going to get to a whole nitty gritty because trust me, that'll be a 5-hour podcast and we will all fall asleep going through those details, okay? We don't got that kind of attention span here. But I just say the tariff thing, but I don't know, like there's some victories coming along, but I don't know how impactful it's going to be and is it going to be short term or long term? It's too soon to say if it's going to be positive. Maybe there's methods to madness. Maybe I'm naive. I don't know. Trump is a chaos. He's unpredictable. He's a wild card.
On
I'm
purpose.
sure. Yeah, yeah, on purpose. Yeah. I mean, if you know his background and he's been involved with WWE and entertainment, this is what they thrive on. And art of the deal, all this is, if you read some of this, you have some, and I'm going to emphasize some understanding of Trump's, you can say either genius or madness, whatever you want to call it. At least you have some idea. He ain't going to reveal everything. The chaos and all that's going to still go, it's going to throw you off a loop, even if you read that. But at least you have some idea. And maybe you can predict some things correctly. It'll ease you just a bit. Not that I want to push this book, but I read some of it. I was like, he'll be an interesting president for better or worse. I think he'll be a mixed bag, but whatever. Enough of me bashing and praising Trump at the same time because I'm not the biggest supporter, nor I am the biggest hater of Trump. I see the good and the bad, and so does the guest, okay? And he's not pro or anti-Trump, and we shouldn't be any of those things. We should be pro-America, if anything. Forget the Dems and the Republicans because if you pick those camps, you lower your IQ point by, I'll say 30% because you're just going to go their narrative, their bias, their point of view. And listen, they both are kooky. They both are crazy. All right. I will call them even the corporate corrupt uniparty. Corporations support both of those parties. I think some things don't change. Doesn't matter who's in charge. It's not conspiracy theory. You see who funds them? I put opensource.com to see who funds the party. Sometimes it's one, and some megadones that funds both parties. I think some agendas don't change. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. All right, I'm going to let you talk because so far you have a major streak here. I think I ruined it. Deal with it. This is your host here. Okay.
Well,
I could deal with the hate. I'll be happy. This is my own decision. I'll live with it. I own it. And you could crucify me in the comment section. YouTube might cancel you, but not me. I believe in freedom of speech. And then I'll put this on Rumble where you're not going to be canceled as much eventually. So the only question I got, and you won't be the first to compare Trump to this character. I will call him a flawed, good intentioned character. And I'm sure he's going to see us from our way. Cyrus the Great. They compare Trump to this guy. First of all, I'm going to be extra analytical critical. Is that a correct? Is that a good comparison? And then how is not a good comparison? I'm just trying to get a deeper
Okay.
understanding because I have heard other theologians say Trump is like Cyrus the Great. Does some flawed things, but he has good intentions. There's some good and bad results that come out of him. You already talked about some of the policies, but people's been comparing him to Cyrus the Great, especially among certain church communities.
Well, in the whole Cyrus thing, that actually came up when he was running the first time. An evangelical Protestant brought it up. But once he came in, actually, over in Israel, the group called the Sanhedrin actually put out coins that had Donald Trump's head and Cyrus the Great on it. And a rabbi last week or the week before actually went out and again said why he thinks Trump is Cyrus the Great. And some Protestant writers have said the same thing. I don't know if you know, but actually the last YouTube video I made was is Donald Trump Cyrus the Great? So this is a topic I am familiar with. I can understand why people make some of the comparisons, but there's a few really different things. One, the Bible doesn't say there's going to be a second Cyrus the Great, but specifically for Cyrus the Great, he was actually prophesied by name. Okay, so before he came in, he was prophesied that he was going to come. And in the book of Ezra said that Cyrus the Great fulfilled various things that were predicted. This happened 2,400, 2,500 years ago. Now, now some, on the other hand, have taken this to another step and said, well, Trump is prophesied by name in the Bible. He is the Trump of God. That's really a stretch for lots of reasons. And so I don't accept that. But the difference with Cyrus the Great told the children of Israel they go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. And so they did. He also went and he gave them the implements of the temple that the Persian Empire had. They'd gotten them because they invaded, they had it. So they let them go back and build that. And so so because Donald Trump is pro-Israel, people have said, well, he's not an Israelite. Well, he's not a Jew. Let's just say that. They consider him a Gentile and that he made this positive thing toward him, and that's a good thing. So Cyrus did something positive. So in that way, I suppose he's similar. Others have gone so far as to predict that when he was in office last time that he was going to authorize, which he can't really do, the construction of a third temple in Jerusalem. Okay. Oh yeah, there are predictions about that, and people thought because Trump came in that they'll build a third temple in Jerusalem, and that's not required by Scripture. I know there's a bunch of Protestant prophecy watchers who think it's required. It's actually not required, but that gets back to the Cyrus the Great thing. And as far as the Bible and this third temple kind of an idea, the Bible only requires that you have an altar to be able to do sacrifices. So what's that got to do with anything? In the book of Daniel, 4 places it talks about sacrifices being stopped. And it's not referring to what happened when the temple got destroyed in 70 AD. It says it's for the appointed time of the end. And that wasn't the time of the end. That was the end of the old temple, but that is at the time of the end. All right. So people know, well, then they've got to sacrifice, so they have to have a temple. No, all they need is an altar. And in the book of Ezra, chapter 3, verse 6, it specifically says that they sacrificed on an altar, but they hadn't built a new temple yet. They finally did, but they didn't have one then. So that's one thing people kind of get off. And also, when Trump technically does not run the nation of Israel, Cyrus the Great did run ancient Israel. They were his part of his empire. The United States has a lot of influence over Israel, and you might make the argument. Reality was Cyrus could put in his troops, did put in his troops there. Trump hasn't done that to Israel, and we don't anticipate him doing that. So there's several ways that he's different, and including the fact that he was not prophesied by name to rise up. Now, that being said, the Bible says God puts in whoever he wants. Okay. So I think there are prophetic reasons that Donald Trump is in office, but not that he's Cyrus the Great.
Oh, that's a very well thought out explanation. I'm not surprised I was going to get something like that. That's why I asked it. I love when people give comparisons, but they try to mold that comparison, make it seem exactly the same. That's that bias. He's president of the United States. His influence, but Cyrus actually did had, it's true, Israel part of the empire. That is a distinction that needs to be made. Those times were different. I'm sure there's some similarities, but some people just forget the differences and just choose just to wash it out. So we should make their analogy fit perfectly in an artificial way. That's like trying to shove circle to a square peg and just mold use clay just to try to fill it up. It looks hideous and tacky. That's what they some people do with the analogy. That's why I have to ask that. It's not original, but I actually like the explanation to it because it's well thought out. You know, I like well thought out. You want some explanations. Some of you audience, so you want ABC explanation. Oh, Donald Trump is exactly like Cyrus the Great. Wrong. You love that explanation. You just, I don't know, have a drink or something. I don't know. Just don't listen to this podcast because I'll be happy to disappoint you. I know I'll actually take a great thrill of that. All right. And me, like I said, this is like the third theologian I've heard that comparison, and they say, yeah, he was flawed like Cyrus. He did some unintentional bad things, but yeah, he helped out the Israelites. Yeah, yeah. See, I can see that similarity. Great influence, of course, except Donald Trump is not an emperor that's conquering multiple nations. And I'm sure if that was the case, the world and the UN will be in the uproar. Okay, we already do some things in the UN that causes a major uproar. Okay, and we don't have to think deep. You know, this is Israel and Iran conflict. Is things with Israel that's already a major controversy. I'm not going to dig too deep into that because, for once, look, I know some people's opinion of the whole genocide thing and all that, and I'll agree it is very genocidal what's going on there. But at the same time, I don't want to condemn all the Israelites either. So that's the position I'm in. I think they need to they need to exist. They're God's children, And it's tough. I don't know what's the solution to that. I'm just a guy that's just yelling at the mic and at my computer screen. I don't know, but they're human beings. That's just my perspective. I'm not. Some people can say I'm left on that, but no, I'm not going to condemn all Israel. I condemn the government. I'll criticize the government, but not the people. Even the people protest against it. That's the nuanced perspective,
Well,
And Israel has Arab citizens, in their thing. So are they all evil? No. It's just very yeah. Feel free to chime in.
well, I was going to say on the whole peace thing, Donald Trump has made proposals called the Abraham Accords, and he may be involved in coming with a peace deal. The Bible actually prophesies that there's going to be a peace deal over there. Now, what's interesting is while I rely on biblical prophecies, Islamic prophecies say the same thing. Both biblical and Islamic prophecies, by the way, say there's going to be a 7-year deal between a European leader and a Muslim leader. Now, the Bible doesn't call him a Muslim leader. The Bible calls that person the king of the south. It tells us this includes Egypt, Libya, North Africa, places are Muslim, okay, that are predominantly Muslim, Islam, the followers of Islam. So that's something that he may get involved in, and he tried to do something before. I suspect, however, though, we may see Iran react against Israel before we see a deal like that. But there is a temporary peace deal that is prophesied. But getting back to prophecy, both the Bible in the book of Daniel chapter 9 and the Islamic prophecy says that the deal is going to be broken in the middle of it. So a European guy is going to confirm a deal. It could be Donald Trump's deal, all right? But the Bible just says there's somebody in Europe who's not the top person who's going to confirm a deal. Islamic prophecy says a European leader is going to make a deal. And after 3.5 years, he's going to break the deal. And that's both in Islam and in the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament of the Bible. So those are some things that could happen. And so we could see a temporary peace deal in the Middle East. So that's something that may happen, and Donald Trump may be involved with that. But one thing you had mentioned before in a previous segment I was going to comment on, and that is like 45 or 50 years ago, I used to watch ABC, CBS, NBC News on a fairly regular basis, right? One day, we had a couple of TVs. My roommate had an extra TV. And I noticed that almost all the same stories were on all three of those networks. And I thought, that's a strange coincidence. Okay? I mean, there were some stories that were all very, very similar. And you mentioned the difference between Fox and CNN, and there's other ones, MSNBC, Newsmax, whatever, OAN News and whatever. But what I actually do in the morning, in the typical morning, by 6 a.m. California time, I've actually scanned 300 or so headlines every day. And then I make 3 posts a day, by the way, at the cogwriter.com website. And the reason I'm bringing this out, not a shameless plug, but this will be a shameless plug, COGWRITER.com. But no, the reason I'm bringing it up It's like this morning on the regular news sources, it didn't tell you much about the fact that Russia has now claimed it's now got total control of an area called Luhansk. And but it wasn't really covered, and it may be on some other news, but because I looked at hundreds, I saw 2 places that mentioned it. And so I read about it this morning because that's the other thing that we see is there's an information overload, and some places we only want to cover these stories, or we only want to cover if it looks this way story. Fortunately, the internet isn't totally censored yet. They're working on it, by the way. They want to do it. But by the way, just as a warning, I believe the Bible prophesies the control over the internet in a couple of different places, both the Old Testament and the New Testament. Both those places. You're going to have a problem with information. The Bible actually prophesies knowledge will be increased in the end times. That's happening. But it also says we're going to see a famine of the word, which I think is going to be censorship. You've got the issue now with the news. One, they can only cover so much. And two, I haven't seen any news network that's not biased. Now, I'm like you. I also do watch News Nation. Last time I watched News Nation was last night. Okay? I haven't watched it today yet. It's a little too early for me here. But the hosts are definitely biased. And I'll pick on one for no good reason. Chris Cuomo tries to pretend he's not biased. And he's not as biased as he used to be. But he still is. And Leland, I can't remember his last name, gives the V. He tries not to be biased, but he's definitely biased on the right, whereas Cuomo's still biased on the left. But at least those guys are making an effort. Whereas you watch MSNBC or Newsmax, we'll just use those two. There's not much of an effort usually. But anyway, getting back to prophecies and such, Donald Trump. The other thing he's doing is he's showing the Europeans, by the way, what happens when you have, we'll call him a strongman type leader. Now, I know some people say Trump is a phony and all this kind of stuff. And I assume you're familiar with the term taco for
Oh
Donald
yeah,
Trump.
the familiar. Yeah, on the recent context.
Yeah, there's
I mean, we
recent
all know the
context.
taco food. It's not taco food, people.
No, not
So
taco food.
yeah.
Taco stands for Trump always chickens out. Now, that was somebody from the left saying that. Now, he just bombed Iran, which suggested that he didn't always chicken out. And he had Israel bomb Iran before that, which suggests the same thing. I'm not commenting about that, but my point was Trump didn't chicken out. Europeans are seeing this, and you think the United States is bureaucratic. Europe's got it worse. And there's a biblical prophecy in the book of Revelation, chapter 17, verses 12 and 13. That says, essentially, Europe is going to reorganize. Now, right now, you got 27 countries in the EU, 28 or so, but are close. There's another half a dozen or so who want to get in. And the Bible says we're going to see a reorganization there into 10. Okay? So they want to manage that. But then it says those 10, we don't know if they planned it early or it's too difficult to work with the other 9. They decided to give their power to that guy I told you about, the one, the beast arises from the sea. And you can read that in Revelation 17:13. And I suspect that one of the unintended consequences of Donald Trump trying to act like a strong man is the Europeans are going to say, we didn't like Donald Trump for this, and this, but he got some stuff done. Okay? We don't want somebody like Trump, but we kind of want a strong leader. And that's in the prophet, that's prophesied. And, I'm not blaming the president for being the way he is. I wish he wouldn't exaggerate. Like, for example, when he talked about the U.S. bombing of the nuclear facilities and he said it was totally obliterated everything, I didn't believe him. I believed that's what he hoped, but I said, how do you know? Stuff's underground. It's going to take time. And even then, the United States isn't over there. How do we know? And again, I don't think it was totally obliterated. I wish he would not have said that. And also, according to the report I read, the Iranians got rid of their enriched uranium before it happened. So they still have it. So while I do think it had an effect, I wish the president would be more precise in his terms and not exaggerate. I think that causes people on the middle and the right to not trust him, and those on the left to say, look, you can't trust him. I knew it was Trump, I hate to say this, I knew it was Trump being Trump, but that's really not acceptable. It doesn't matter who he is, who you are, you're supposed to tell the truth. But the other thing that he's doing by making some of the comments, and one of the things he said is, look, I want to deal with this European nation and that one. I don't want you to deal with all you together. What he's doing is he's bringing them closer together because they've got a rule in Europe, by the way, on trade, all the same. You can't play this game because they know what would happen. So the more he does that, the more he's bringing them together. Now, Donald Trump is unique among world leaders. He was the most well-known world leader who opposed the UK staying in the European Union. He was the biggest voice telling the UK to get out, who was not in the UK. There were other voices, but nobody with the influence of Trump. Because Trump would like to see Europe break up into 20 some other different countries. I'll deal with you, I'll deal with you, I'll deal with you, because I'm way bigger than you guys. But actually together, we're not. The United States is not. So, but doing what he's doing, I think he is bringing them closer together, unity-wise. And that's another unintended consequence. And I mentioned about debt. One thing I've neglected to say, there's a prophecy from the book of Habakkuk. That's an Old Testament Hebrew prophet, 2,600 years ago, that warns about a highly indebted nation, one who loads up pledges, treasury bills in modern terms, I would think. And at some point in time, that's not going to work, and that's going to lead to destruction. And so that's something that, again, I mentioned before, this Trump administration, the prior Trump administration, the Biden administration, the Obama administration, the previous Bush administration, they all accelerated the debt. Biblically, I think that's a mistake. I studied economics too, by the way. I've got a bunch of classes I took in economics. This debt thing is going to be a problem. It's more of a problem than most people think. Matter of fact, in the book of Habakkuk, God actually says that when you read this, you're going to have to run. He says, even though it tarries, even though it's going to take a while, it's going to happen, and it's going to really, really be bad. And so that's one of the warnings that we've been giving out for quite a few years, because this is not a good thing. And since you said I could do a shameless plug, I do talk about it again in this particular book, which is available at Amazon. And by the way, it's got lots of scriptures, a lot of news references. Okay, let's see. Let me look in the back here. Not counting scriptures, over 300 references, not counting scriptures in this. And not counting various other prophecies from other religions, because a lot of them tie in for different reasons. So I talk about some of those in there as well.
All right, let me talk to the more secular heathens. There you go. He halfway appeased you with news references. So angels is look. It does have a lot of biblical tie-in, of course. You theologian, what do you expect? That's like trying to ride a bike. They expect to move without wheels.
But
You
again,
want that? I mean,
people don't have to agree with my conclusions. I put out information. Right. I quote a lot, and it was actually funny. During COVID, I got something removed from Facebook. It was like this was about 3 pages with 35 references. And my question was, what did I say that was wrong? Everything I said was scientifically correct. By the way, I'm also a published scientist. You can go to the National Institutes of Health Medical Database, type in my last name, Thiel, and find papers I've written on natural vitamins, Down syndrome, epilepsy, various things. So I'm a scientist. I know how to write scientific papers. I understand science. But we were censored by people who had an agenda. And what the agenda was not to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So again, I understand people don't agree with my opinions. But again, when we bring up facts, you can agree on the fact, you may disagree what it means. And so one of the things I go in the book are those kinds of things. And as I said, in my previous Trump book, that first administration, 22 things, to 24 actually, depending on how you count them, started lined up with it. In the current one, at least 14 so far, and the book's only been out since January 16th of this year.
So far, the prediction has a great track record. There's more correct predictions to come, confirmations. Some of these take longer. And so I want to say, look, you see, he's not just a theologian; he's an economist, scientist. So he has worldly expertise. Just to put it that way, especially for your secular people. The heathens. I still love you though. You're a heathen though. I love you. No, I ain't perfect either. I've done heathenistic things, especially when I swear, but I want to behave in front of this theologian here. You have especially the older episodes where I went off the tangent. So you want that more controversial stuff, you go to older episodes. But you already said so much. Just one more thing I want to say. I want you to have your chance to talk about the growth of technology, through your library. And I'm going to promise you that. I mean, you already gave me so much value. I mean, I might as well just give a little something back. That was an idea that you put out. I'm not used to guests giving an idea, but I like it. It's actually refreshing to me.
Okay, well,
So feel free to go through that.
in terms of growth technology, I remember growing up, my father, as a part-time thing, would do people's taxes, and he got a calculator. Now, it's not like modern people think. You had to move your arm back and forth. So he would have me do it by hand while he was doing it. I was actually faster than the calculator. But I was one of the first people who did get a calculator, an electronic calculator, allowed to use it in my geometry class. I think I was the only kid who had one. And so I got involved with technology that way. Then, when I was in the military, I actually used what's called a key punch machine. I don't know if your listeners know what a key punch machine even is, but it made there would be a card that looked kind of like this big. It would put holes in it. You could only do 80 characters. And so I keyed that in. This is before they had terminals, like you can see. This is before then. Then we've got the terminals. Then I have a master's from USC, and I was in one of their computer buildings. Now I'm going back over 40, almost 45 years ago. Now that building in modern times would have cost probably $10 million, $5 or $10 million. And what it did is it housed hard drives. Now a hard drive we're talking about was about the size of a 2-drawer filing cabinet. Okay. And each of those held 50 megabytes of data. And they had to cool it because those hard drives are throwing off heat. So you got a big energy cost and all this kind of stuff, right? I just pulled this out. This holds more than that building, probably times, I don't know, a factor of 10 or 100 in terms of growth of technology. Now, technology can be used for good. It can be used for evil. Now, one of the things that I think is evil, by the way, is I posted something yesterday at the Cogwriter website. And there's a company called Coracle Labs, and they've got a computer now that uses human brain cells. In Switzerland, last year, they came up with this stuff. They actually are using human brain cells. And I think that's wrong. Okay. They've gone to where they should not go. In terms of technology and where it's heading, talk about AI for just a moment or two. My son has a website called fastestsearch.com. And over there, the reason I mention it, because it's free to have, it's got like 6 or 7, maybe 8 AI programs. And actually, I accessed many of them today. And it's interesting because of my academic background, I know when I get wrong answers, number one. And two, don't just use one if you're doing research. I was on one today and I got totally different answers from 6 or 7 AI programs. And so I will use it. But also, when they tell me that some document says something, I've learned I have to look that document up because most of the time it does not exist or it's wrong. And AI actually apologized to me and says I was correct, but that doesn't help me. I wasted my time and I didn't get what I wanted. So that's one concern about AI. But another concern, getting to prophecy, and this is the last prophecy I plan on talking about here. In the book of Revelation, in chapter 13, verses 15 through 18, the Apostle John wrote down that you're not going to be able to buy and sell unless you have the mark of the beast. The number's name is number 666. Well, when the Apostle John wrote that nearly 2,000 years ago, that wasn't possible. Okay, let's say you and I wanted to buy or sell. Okay, you wanted to sell me a chicken. Okay, well, what do? If the government's bothering us, we go in the field. We go in the woods. I give you a copper coin or silver coin. I don't know how much a chicken was worth back then. You give me a chicken. I get to eat. You get the money. So when John was inspired to write this down, that type of technology did not exist. He also warned about a 200 million man army. It's in the book of Revelation. There weren't 200 million men on the earth at the time he wrote that down. Okay. So for prophecy doubters, and tying it into technology. Now we do have the technology as we get more and more toward digital currencies. Look, in the United States, you realize we used to have $1 million bills, and $10,000 bills, and all that. Now the only thing we've got is 100. And a $100 bill doesn't buys what a dollar did 110 years ago, 120 years, something like that. Okay. So they're moving more and more toward have to be digital because I realize $100 is still a fair amount of money. All right, don't get me wrong. But with inflation and everything else, the U.S. is moving in this direction. In Europe, there heavily. My wife and I went to Sweden. That was before COVID. And we went to that. My wife wanted to go to this one museum. And this museum said they dream of a world with only digital currency. Now, for some reason, they think that's going to prevent crime uh, and is supposedly good for you. But that means every time you buy anything, the government sees what you're doing. That's the same thing what they're going to do with the internet. Is it Texas? I think the Supreme Court just ruled that it was okay, Texas or Florida, to validate if somebody is over 18 in order to go to a porn site. Now, I don't go to porn sites, and I realize why there should be restrictions. But this is a first step toward you can't go on the internet without an ID. When my wife and I were in Italy 10, 15 years ago, when we went to an internet cafe, you had to show your ID, and they wrote so they knew. I've never actually been to Russia, but I've been in the Moscow airport twice, and with a long connection, like 7 or 9 hours, some horrible thing, right? So I'm going to go on the internet, right? Can't go on the internet unless you use a cell phone and they give you a code. Now, the first time I was in Moscow airport, I didn't have, actually for both times, I didn't own a cell phone at the time. So one woman felt sorry for me at a restaurant. She was a waitress. She let me get in. And then somebody else from another country did it for me as well. But that's actually why I actually have a cell phone, because I don't use them except for like WhatsApp or whatever. But sometimes you have to have them for verification purposes now. And so more and more, in terms of technology and prophecy, we're seeing these things enmesh. I mentioned that Daniel prophesied that knowledge would be increased, kind of have that with the internet. John wrote down that they can control buying and selling. And we're now to that point, and we weren't to that point 100 years ago, okay, at least for controlling all that stuff. So that's one of the reasons why I find the prophecies accurate. But it doesn't mean that people misinterpret them, just like the Cyrus the Great stuff and all that kind of stuff. I'm not here to apologize for people who misinterpret Scripture. And I'm sure I'll make some mistakes too. Okay. So, but anyway, that's what I'm going to talk about with technology just briefly.
All right, let me go aggravate the comment people even more, the commenters. I'm not expecting to apologize for anybody else. Everybody's responsible for their own predictions, comments, or any of that. Bob is accountable to Bob. Elias is accountable to Elias, okay? Not me being accountable to Bob or vice versa, okay? That's crazy. We're supposed to be adults here, okay? None of this children shenanigans and all that, even though, the government is increasingly getting controlling and all of that. And you're all going to be watched like old children, young children, underdeveloped children. And well, my opinion on that. I mean, I'm against it, but it's heading towards that direction anyway. Especially our increasing reliance on these smartphones and internet and all that. It is inevitable. I mean, and biblical prophecies, I say they're always right. I just think we, the people, sometimes misinterpret them because of our cultural or personal bias or I don't know, whatever the mainstream media tells us people are, or social media. That's another brainwashing source as well. We get influenced by that as well. The doom scrolling, or for the more, more obsessed people, they call it channel surfing. But I'm going to call it channeling doom. There you go. That's a new term. That's a coin term. There you go. And if you take that, I'm going to copyright. I'm going to sue you. No, I'm kidding. You could take it. I don't really care. Channeling doom for those who are still obsessed with cable. We got doom scroll for social media folks. So why is it? Because a lot of the content in there is junk. There's a lot of bad knowledge. Let's be real. And we're getting stuff with it. Even me, I use, my primitive cable, so that's like smart TV cable, and the social media to see what the heck is going on. I think we should be informed, but we shouldn't be so obsessed and absorb all of this. I'm gonna be honest, junk. So a lot of it is junk out there, and we gotta be more mindful about how we consume it. That's why I'm pro digital detox. I thought it was silly, but actually has some not surprising positive benefits. The brain's aging is restored. That's good. That's what I'm going to say. Before I keep on rambling, we already gave them a ton of value. Audience, I hope you gain some value out of this. The news people, the tech people, and most importantly, the spiritual people. I hope you gain some value out of this, because he actually he actually meshed three of the main topics I cover. That's why I wanted. That's why I encourage us about the growth of technology. And he said it was optional, but I didn't mind it. It'll make my podcast a bit different. Because trust me, he's on a tour, okay, and I gotta make mine different. That's my only concern. I gotta make mine at least a little different. Yeah, I'm sure my personality, my question could do that, but even content wise, so that's why I like to kind of stand out. And if I end up not being unique, well, I can't predict what's going to go on 10 years later. Maybe I'll be the new normal. But as of now, I'm the proud black sheep, and I like that. God made everybody different, okay? That's what I'm going to say about that. So let's do well, actually, before we do the shameless plug in, even the irrelevant stuff, anything else you should add before we wrap this up?
Well, I wasn't going to mention scripture, but there's one more. Apostle Paul wrote about knowledge falsely called to Timothy. And so that's a situation that you got to be careful for now, but it's always been a problem. I mean, that's why Pilate said to Jesus, what is truth? Okay. So it's always been a problem. But now with social media and with the internet, things can get blown out of proportion and people convince themselves of things they don't want to. And people go into their own echo chambers a lot. But anyway, I don't apologize. In fact, I believe in scripture. I do believe biblical prophecies are coming to pass. And as far as a shameless plug, yeah, I mentioned it. And, this particular book is the one that I was talking about today because a lot of what's in here has been happening. A lot of things are going to happen that I think people need to know. So anyway, thanks for having me on.
No problem. And let's do another plug in. The first book you wrote. What was that title called? Let's link that in as well. So for the hardcore, this is more for the hardcore people.
Donald Trump in America's Apocalypse. That was the first one about Trump. But no, I've written like 30 books. Okay. I actually have one out on the new Pope, Pope Leo. That came out within hours of him going into office. And so far, he's fulfilled at least one thing that I haven't had in that book.
Let's see. Can that be a possible future topic? I would like to dig into him. I think he's an interesting pope for sure. So far, he's most vocal on opposing Trump. I think on immigration, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, he's definitely more vocal. I mean, but I would say he's restoring some conservative tradition in terms of marriage between men and women based on his opinion, decree, whatever you want to call it. Feel free to correct me there.
Yeah, he's less offensive to the average Roman Catholic than Pope Francis was.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And he wasn't. He's. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think he did attend the Republican National Conventions. He's I'll say for the Republican. Oh, hey, now all Republicans support Trump. I don't have to say all is a Democrat and all that. No, you'd be surprised. There are anti-Trump Republicans. I mean, one reoccurring guest I got is a really anti-Trump Republican. That's why I can't always put people in boxes. You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. He's just like, oh, he's not a real conservative. He's ruining the Republican Party. But I'm not going to plug in that guess too much. But I'm going to link those two books in there. Well, I'm going to put more of the unintended consequences. But if you want to be hardcore, dig deep into it, get the other book as well. If you want, especially if you want to scrutinize the Bob Thiel here, be obsessed, challenge him, whatever. And if you want him back, say so. I don't mind it. I mean, I already have one idea. Let's dig deep into the popes. I haven't talked about the Pope. So that could be something new. He does affect the world stage. Why not? Why not? First American Pope at that. So he made history on that. I didn't think American Pope was going to be elected in my lifetime, to be honest. I really didn't think so. So I was actually a bit surprised. I thought it was going to be someone from another nation. I don't mind it, but I'm just shocked that it came this quickly. So not complaining so far. And not just the books. I'm going to link to his site. He references a couple of times. COG writer. That's going to be in there, right? That's going to be in there. It's right now, and not right now. In the description. Now I can't talk. Why is my brain going mush? It's going to stay in there. It's going to stay in the recording. I'm imperfect. Deal with it. And his social media is going to be all that's going to be listed in the description. The social media. So if you want to follow him, his posts, be happy, be mad, or be in between. I don't know what that feeling is. Maybe be bipolar. You like him one day, you hate him another. I'm sure he's going to welcome it. He's a very accomplished man. I'm sure he doesn't need your approval. I could say that. I know it's going to rub you out the wrong way because you think the world revolves around you. No. It doesn't. But feel free to express your opinion. I don't discourage that. You think he's great? At least list one reason why, not just he's great. I ignore those. Or if you don't like him, you think he's kooky crazy, list one reason why. And the same thing with your hosts too. Same thing with your hosts. They'll just say you bad, you're stupid, or you're awesome, you're the next coming to Jesus Christ. I'm going to ignore those comments. That doesn't mean anything to me. And that's blasphemous too. Saying I'm the next coming of Jesus. I will reject that compliment in an instant. That is been reserved to a certain someone, and this is Bible 101. You don't do that unless you're trying to stir controversy. All right. Oh, enough of that yammering. All of that, his books, websites, social medias is going to be listed in the description. Now for my somewhat lengthy shameless plug-in. Politically High Tech, follow on YouTube, Twitter. I refuse to call it X. Bad branding. X, I think of so many things, but not social media accounts. Rumble, and what's the other one? Why am I forgetting? Yeah, Rumble, Twitter, Facebook. Those are four I have. And give a like, share, subscribe, and I already butcher you with the comment section. Feel free to express your opinion in there. You might censor you. I don't. Okay. YouTube has a strict policy that Rumble, when it gets uploaded to Rumble eventually, feel free to express your craziness. You know, I rather if you get humiliated by the public square, that's on you. Just know that risk might happen, and I will not protect you because I don't believe in this safe space thing. It's not a left wing thing. Also, the right wing got their own slick version of that as well. So if you're using anti-Semitism, just try to shut down anybody who was, I'll say, critical of Israel. You know, that's their version of being woke, in my opinion. I might rub some of y'all the wrong way. Oh well. I don't believe in safe space and echo chambers. Nope. Nope. This is why I think I have a pretty rational point of view, centrist point of view, because I don't believe in that. I joined one camp before, I joined the other camp. They both kooky, they both crazy, they both corrupt. Okay? That's why I've learned. That's why I'm registered independent. I don't believe in that. Okay? So, and then one more thing for the audio people. Give a review. If you want to give a review, give it on Apple Podcasts. That's the only ones I'm paying attention to. Spotify, I don't care for it. Give a 5-star if you want. Give give your opinion on the show. What's doing great? And if you're more critical, what can I improve on? All right. That I want to see those kind of comments. I don't need perfection. Perfection is false. Perfection is impossible. Okay. That's what I'm going to say. Finally, to wrap this up. So once you go through this audio or visual journey, have a blessed day, afternoon, or night.